Ukrainian refugees. And later, an historic week in Washington as the confirmation hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black female Supreme Court pick, have officially begun on Capitol Hill. How hard are Republicans willing to go in an attempt to disrupt her nomination? We're about to find out. Welcome to Meet the Press Daily. I'm Garrett Hake, in for Chuck Todd at the start of a consequential week for both NATO and the Biden presidency. At any moment, we expect the White House to give us more details about President Biden's conversation this morning with fellow NATO leaders from France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom. It comes just 2 days before the president heads to Brussels for an emergency NATO summit to address the war in Ukraine. He will then head to Poland to meet with Polish President Duda, whose country sits at the center of a massive refugee crisis. In recent days, Russia has intensified its assault on cities all across Ukraine, including in the west, near the Polish border, with many of those attacks targeting civilians, according to Ukrainian officials. There's a shopping center in Kyiv, a mental health center in Mykolaiv, and several homes in Odessa. A senior Pentagon official tells NBC News that Russia's military advance has not made significant advances over the last 24 hours. In fact, the Pentagon's current assessment is that Russia hasn't achieved any of its military objectives so far. Ukraine has rejected Russian demands to surrender the southern city of Mariupol. Officials believe that as many as 300,000 people remain trapped there, with 90% of the city destroyed. In Ukraine's capital city, Mayor Klitschko has imposed a new curfew from now until Wednesday as shelling in and around Kyiv intensifies. Meanwhile, this morning at the United States Holocaust Museum, Secretary of State Tony Blinken called out Russia for its completely false claim that the war is about ending genocide by the Ukrainian government.
I can recall a few times when that history felt so urgent, or the responsibility it imparts on all of us so pressing. As we meet, the Russian government continues to wage its unprovoked, brutal war in Ukraine. The Kremlin has tried to justify this war by falsely claiming that it's intervening to stop genocide, abusing the term that we reserve for the gravest atrocities, disrespecting every victim of this heinous crime.
And now, despite Ukrainian President Zelensky's openness to meeting directly with Vladimir Putin, a Kremlin spokesman says both sides have a long way to go before that meeting can take place, and they say peace talks have yielded no significant progress. Joining me now is Richard Engel in Kyiv and Shannon Pettypiece at the White House. And Richard, I'll start with you. Ukraine rejected this Russian offer to surrender Mariupol. Do the Ukrainians have confidence they can keep Mariupol from falling under Russian control, or is this just about fighting for every inch of their country?
It's about fighting for every inch of their country. Mariupol is a significant city. It has 400,000 people in it, or had 400,000 people in it. And it is one of Vladimir Putin's main objectives because it lies right in between Russian territory and Crimea. So if Russia can take Mariupol, then it could effectively establish a land bridge between the Russian border and Crimea, which it annexed. But taking areas, and Russia has been able to take very, very few areas, and holding them are completely different. So even if Russia were able to take Mariupol, and it has made the city unlivable, it is unlikely that it would be able to hold it or fully pacify the population, at least based on what we're seeing in other places. Kherson, which is a smaller city, not very far from Mariupol, was captured by Russian forces, but almost every day the people have been coming out onto the streets protesting against Russian troops, and it is not just in Kherson. There was an extraordinary scene today where hundreds of people came out to protest. They were walking up to Russian troops, and the Russian troops started firing wildly into the air, throwing what looked like stun grenades and smoke bombs into the crowds. At least one person was injured, shot in the leg. The Russians, at least in this case, didn't level their guns and fire directly into the crowds. But it shows that they're having serious population controls in the small and few places that they are controlling. So we are now over 3 weeks into this offensive, and Russia has achieved very few of its military gains. And it is continuing now instead to pound population centers, to hit the center of Kyiv, driving this city once again into a curfew, which is going to start very soon and last for the next 35 hours or so. But they have not managed to break this country. They haven't managed to take key population centers like Kyiv and the places that they have taken, they don't control.
Richard, can you expand on how you're seeing the tactics change with more and more of these civilian areas like where you are in Kyiv being targeted?
So the Russian military strategy, which has been complicated, confusing, disorganized, not just according to Ukrainian and American officials, it has been quite clear that it has been disorganized here from the beginning, has changed repeatedly. In the opening days of the operation, when everyone thought that it was going to be quick, that the Russian army, numerically so superior to the Ukrainian army, would quickly roll over this country, quickly capture Kyiv, coming down from Belarus. Not only did that not happen, the Russian advance quickly stalled, so they changed tactics. They went after cities in with large numbers of troops, attacking Kharkiv, attacking Mariupol. That hasn't been successful. So now the Russians are more or less stalled. They're dug in, and they are just lobbing weapons into cities, Kyiv included, with the hope, it seems, that they can punish the government, inflict enough pain that they can extract higher prices at peace negotiations. No indications at this stage that either side is very close to peace negotiations, but the Russians are trying to at least use some of their muscle to improve their hand. And it would be a very significant move for them if they could take and keep Mariupol. But just today, as we started out, the Ukrainian government rejected that out of hand.
And Shannon Pettypiece, it seems like President Biden's been in more or less constant contact with his European counterparts over the last couple of weeks. He had another call this morning with European leaders. Do we know anything about what came out of that?
Yeah, we haven't gotten a readout yet from the White House as to what was discussed there, and I certainly anticipate that'll come up in the press briefing in about an hour from now. Certainly, this G7 group of world leaders is a very significant group for the president to be talking to once again, and he will also be meeting them in Brussels. I mean, just a little reminder of how things have changed. A few years ago, during the Trump administration, then President Trump was talking about having Putin join the G7, to join this group of leaders that is now talking about how they can economically, from a humanitarian standpoint, militarily come together to support Ukraine and fend off this Russian invasion. Of course, the president is going to be, as you noted, in Europe next week. He will not only meet with these G7 leaders, but the NATO leaders, European allies. And White House officials, administration officials have signaled that those meetings are, of course, going to be about this coordinated response and what more these world leaders can do as we approach 1 month of this conflict. But it is also very much, they say, about showing a united front, about reassuring the NATO allies that the U.S. will indeed come to defend any NATO country if Russia and Putin are to expand this invasion beyond Ukraine into NATO territory. And there's definitely an indication they hope that could be a deterrence to Russia and Putin from expanding this any further. Of course, they are focused on trying to resolve this conflict, trying to assist Ukraine in any way they can for the current conflict. But there is also a big element of this that is about trying to deter any future aggression by Putin into those NATO countries.